The gunshot that shattered the morning quiet of Moab, Utah wasn't meant for her, but Beatrice Hollis felt it in her bones anyway, as she stood outside the general store in September of 1878, clutching $3 that had taken her 2 months to save. She had come to buy laudanum for her mother, who lay dying of consumption back in their tiny cabin on the outskirts of town, but the medicine cost $5, and she only had 3. The autumn sun beat down mercilessly on the red rock canyon walls that surrounded the small settlement, and Beatrice wiped sweat from her brow with trembling fingers as she tried to figure out what to do. Her mother had maybe a week left without the medicine, maybe less, and every rattling breath she took sounded like it might be her last. Isaac Ingram had been riding through town when he heard the gunshot, his hand automatically going to the Colt at his hip, before he realized it was just some drunk cowhand firing into the air. He had been working cattle drives for the better part of 6 years, ever since he turned 18 and left his family's failing farm in Kansas, and he had seen enough real violence to know the difference between danger and foolishness. At 24, he was lean and weathered, with dark hair that fell past his collar, and eyes the color of whiskey that had seen more hardship than most men twice his age. He had been planning to ride straight through Moab, maybe stop for supplies and a hot meal before heading south, to find work on one of the big ranches near the Arizona border, but something made him rein in his horse outside the general store. That something was Beatrice Hollis, though he didn't know her name yet. What he noticed first was that she was crying, silent tears streaming down her face as she stood in the dusty street with her hand pressed against the storefront window. What he noticed second, what made his breath catch in his throat, was that her hair was shorn to the scalp, the brutal shortness of it shocking against the feminine lines of her face and the faded calico dress she wore. She looked like she had been through a war, and in a way, Isaac supposed she had. He dismounted and tied his horse to the hitching post, his spurs jingling as he walked toward her. "Miss, are you all right?" Beatrice startled and turned toward him, her hand flying up to her head in an instinctive gesture of shame. She was young, maybe 20 or 21, with gray eyes that held an ocean of sorrow and a delicate beauty that the harsh haircut couldn't quite conceal. Up close, he could see the fine bones of her face, the fullness of her mouth, the way her throat worked as she swallowed hard and tried to compose herself. "I'm fine," she said, but her voice cracked on the words and she looked away from him, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. Isaac knew he should mind his own business. He'd learned long ago that getting involved in other people's troubles usually led to nothing but heartache and complications, and he had enough of both to last him a lifetime. But there was something about the way she stood there, so proud despite her obvious distress, that made it impossible for him to just walk away. "Doesn't look fine to me," he said gently, "and I've seen fine enough times to know the difference." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw the war happening behind her eyes as she tried to decide whether to trust him. He waited, patient as he had learned to be with spooked horses and wounded animals, and after a long moment she let out a shaky breath. "Aha, I need $5, she said simply. "I have 3. My mother is dying and the medicine costs $5 and I don't know what else to do." Isaac reached for his pocket automatically, but she held up her hand to stop him, her spine straightening with fierce pride. "I'm not asking for charity," she said. "I just needed to say it out loud, to make it real. I'll figure something out." "Your hair," Isaac said, and immediately regretted it when he saw her flinch. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be rude." Beatrice's hand went to her scalp again, and this time when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I sold it for my mother's medicine. A wig maker came through town 3 weeks ago and offered me $4 for it. It wasn't enough, but I thought maybe I could earn the rest before she got worse. I take in washing and mending when I can, but there's not much work in a town this size, and most people can barely afford to feed themselves, let alone pay someone else to do their laundry." Isaac felt something crack open in his chest, something he had kept carefully sealed for years. He had seen poverty before, had lived it himself, but there was something about this woman's sacrifice that cut him to the bone. She had given up something so fundamentally part of her identity, had subjected herself to stares and whispers in a society that judged women harshly for even the smallest deviation from propriety, all to try to save her mother's life. "Let me help," he said. "Please. I told you I don't want charity." "Then call it a loan." You can pay me back when you're able." Beatrice looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face for any sign of ulterior motive or mockery. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she finally nodded, though her expression remained guarded. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Isaac thought about lying, about giving her some easy answer that would smooth over the moment, but something about her direct gaze demanded honesty. "Because I watched my own mother die when I was 16, and there wasn't a damn thing I could do about it. We didn't have money for medicine or doctors, and she just wasted away while my father drank himself stupid, and I worked my fingers to the bone trying to keep us fed. If I can help someone else's mother have a fighting chance, then maybe that means something. Maybe it balances the scales a little." Her eyes softened, and for the first time since he had approached her, she didn't look like she was braced for an attack. "I'm Beatrice Hollis. Everyone calls me B. Isaac Ingram." He held out his hand and she took it, her palm small and work-roughened against his. The touch sent an unexpected jolt through him, and from the way her eyes widened slightly, he thought she might have felt it too. They went into the general store together, and Isaac paid the difference for the laudanum without fanfare or comment. The store owner, a portly man named Silas who had a tendency to gossip, raised his eyebrows at the sight of Isaac and Beatrice together, but was wise enough to keep his mouth shut when Isaac fixed him with a hard stare. Beatrice clutched the bottle of medicine to her chest like it was made of gold, and when they stepped back out into the bright sunlight, she turned to him with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you, but I will. I promise." "Where's your cabin?" Isaac asked. "I'll ride with you. It's not safe for a woman alone, especially carrying something valuable." Beatrice looked like she wanted to argue, but practicality won out over pride, and she nodded. "It's about 2 miles east, up in the hills. I don't have a horse, though. I walk it. You can ride with me." The journey to Beatrice's cabin should have been uncomfortable, with her sitting behind him on his horse, her arms wrapped around his waist for balance. Instead, it felt oddly natural, like they had done this 1,000 times before. She gave him directions in a soft voice, pointing out landmarks in the red rock landscape that would have been invisible to someone who didn't know the area intimately. The terrain was harsh and unforgiving, all sand and stone and scrubby vegetation that somehow managed to survive in the brutal heat, but there was a stark beauty to it that Isaac could appreciate. The cabin, when they reached it, was barely more than a shack. The roof sagged in the middle, and the walls were made of rough-hewn logs that had been chinked with mud and straw. A small vegetable garden struggled to survive in a patch of dirt near the door, and a few scraggly chickens pecked at the ground in a makeshift pen. It was the kind of desperate poverty that Isaac recognized all too well, the kind that ground people down until there was nothing left but dust and regret. Beatrice slid off the horse and hurried to the door, then paused and looked back at him. "Would you like to come in? I should give you something for your kindness. I don't have much, but I can offer you coffee and bread." Isaac knew he should decline. He had already spent longer in Moab than he had planned, and every hour he delayed was an hour he wasn't earning money for the winter. But the thought of leaving her alone in this desolate place with only a dying mother for company made something twist in his gut. "Coffee sounds good," he said, dismounting. The interior of the cabin was dim and close, the single room divided by a hanging blanket that served as a partition. Beatrice led him to a rough wooden table and gestured for him to sit while she moved to the other side of the blanket. He could hear her soft voice, murmuring words he couldn't quite make out, and then the sound of liquid being poured. After a few minutes, she emerged, looking drawn but more composed. "I gave her the medicine," Beatrice said. "She's sleeping now. The doctor said the laudanum would help with the pain and the coughing, even if it can't cure her." She busied herself with building up the fire in the small stove and setting a battered coffee pot onto heat. "It will take a few minutes. I'm sorry the accommodations aren't better." "They're just fine," Isaac said, and meant it. He had slept in far worse places over the years, had gone days without a roof over his head at all. At least this cabin had walls and a door that closed. They sat in silence while the coffee brewed, but it wasn't an awkward silence. It was the kind of quiet that came from two people who understood that sometimes words weren't necessary, that just being present was enough. When Beatrice finally poured the coffee into 2 chipped mugs and set one in front of him along with a thick slice of bread, Isaac noticed that her hands were shaking slightly. "When did you last eat?" he asked. I had breakfast. That's not what I asked. Beatrice looked away, her jaw tightening. Yesterday. But I'm fine. Mama needs to keep her strength up more than I do. Isaac pulled his saddlebag onto the table and rummaged through it until he found the dried beef and hardtack he had been saving for the trail. He pushed it toward her without comment, and after a moment of visible internal struggle, she took a piece of the beef and bit into it. The way she closed her eyes in relief told him everything he needed to know about how hungry she really was. They ate together in companionable silence, and Isaac found himself studying her face when she wasn't looking. Even with her hair shorn away, even with the shadows of exhaustion under her eyes, she was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with conventional prettiness. There was strength in the set of her jaw, determination in the way she held herself, and a fierce love in every glance she cast toward the partition that separated them from her mother. She was the kind of woman who would fight to the last breath for the people she loved, and Isaac respected that more than he could say. "Tell me about her," he said finally. "Your mother." Beatrice's expression softened, and a small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Her name is Sarah. She was a teacher before she married my father, which was unusual for a woman back then. She taught me to read and write, to love books and learning. My father died when I was 12, and after that it was just the two of us. We moved out here from Missouri 5 years ago, thinking the dry climate might be better for her health. She had been coughing even then, but we didn't know it was consumption. We thought maybe the clean air would help. Did it? For a while. She got better for almost 2 years, and we were happy. We had this cabin in the garden, and I found work in town doing laundry and mending. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Then last winter she got sick again, and this time it didn't get better. It just kept getting worse, until now she can barely get out of bed. I'm sorry. Beatrice met his eyes, and he saw the weight of impending loss in her gaze. The doctor says she has maybe a month, possibly 2 if we're lucky. The laudanum will help her be comfortable, but it won't save her. Nothing will. So I'm just trying to make sure she doesn't suffer any more than she has to. Isaac wanted to offer her platitudes, to tell her that everything would be all right, but he had too much respect for her intelligence to insult her with empty words. Instead, he reached across the table and covered her hand with his. She looked down at their joined hands, and for a moment he thought she might pull away, but then her fingers curled around his and held on tight. "You're not alone in this," he said. "Not anymore. You don't even know me." "I know enough." From behind the partition came a weak cough, and Beatrice immediately released his hand and went to check on her mother. Isaac heard the murmur of voices, too low for him to make out the words, and then Beatrice emerged looking troubled. "She wants to meet you," she said. "She heard us talking, and she's curious about the man who helped us." Isaac followed Beatrice behind the partition, and his heart clenched at the sight that greeted him. Sarah Hollis was a ghost of a woman, her skin so pale it was almost translucent, and her body wasted away to nothing but bones and loose flesh. But her eyes were bright and intelligent, and when she looked at him, he felt like she could see straight through to his soul. "Mr. Ingram," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "my daughter tells me you're our benefactor." "Just Isaac, madam." And it was nothing. It was everything. Sarah reached out a trembling hand, and Isaac took it gently, mindful of how fragile she was. "Thank you for your kindness. Bea has been so worried, and I felt so helpless watching her sacrifice everything to try to keep me comfortable." "Mama, don't," Beatrice said, her voice thick with emotion. "I would give anything for you. Everything." "I know, sweetheart, but you've given too much already." Sarah's eyes moved to Isaac. "She sold her beautiful hair. Did she tell you that?" She did. It was down to her waist, thick and brown as chestnuts. She loved that hair. And she cut it all off without a moment's hesitation because she loves me more. Tears rolled down Sarah's sunken cheeks. What mother wants to see her child make such sacrifices? "What child wouldn't make them for a mother like you?" Isaac said quietly. "I can see where Beatrice gets her strength from." Sarah studied him for a long moment, and then a small smile touched her lips. "You're a good man, Isaac Ingram, I can tell. Will you stay for supper? We don't have much, but what we have, we'd like to share with you." Isaac knew he should leave. He had already stayed longer than was wise, and if he had any sense at all, he would ride out of Moab and never look back. But when he looked at Beatrice, standing there with hope and something else he couldn't quite name in her eyes, he found himself nodding. "I'd be honored." Supper was simple fare, just beans and cornbread, but it was served with such warmth that it felt like a feast. Sarah was too weak to sit at the table, so they ate in shifts, with Beatrice taking food to her mother first, and then joining Isaac at the table. They talked about inconsequential things at first, safe topics like the weather and the state of the roads, but gradually the conversation deepened. Beatrice told him about her childhood in Missouri, about her father who had been a carpenter, and her mother who had taught her to see beauty in unexpected places. Isaac found himself sharing stories he hadn't told anyone in years, about his own childhood on the Kansas farm, about the brother he had lost to fever when they were boys, about the restlessness that had driven him west. "Do you ever think about settling down?" Beatrice asked as they cleared the table together. "Finding a place to call home?" "Sometimes," Isaac admitted, "but I'm not sure I'd know what to do with myself if I stopped moving. The trail is all I've known for 6 years. "That sounds lonely." "It is." The admission surprised him, but once it was out there, he realized how true it was. He had spent so many years keeping people at arm's length, never staying in one place long enough to form real connections, that he had forgotten what it felt like to be truly seen by another person. But here, in this humble cabin with this remarkable woman, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. He felt like he had come home. As the evening deepened into night, Isaac knew he needed to make a decision. The smart thing would be to ride back to town, find a place to sleep, and leave Moab at first light. But the thought of leaving Beatrice alone out here, with her dying mother and no one to help her, was unbearable. "I could stay," he heard himself say, "just for a while. Help you with things around the place. I'm handy with repairs, and I noticed your roof needs work before the winter rains come." Beatrice looked at him with wide eyes, and he could see her warring with herself, pride battling against desperate need. "I can't ask you to do that." "You're not asking, I'm offering. But your work, you said you needed to find a ranch. The ranches will still be there in a few weeks, and to be honest, I could use a rest. 6 years on the trail takes it out of a man." "Where would you stay? We don't have room here." "I can sleep in the lean to out back. I've slept in worse places." Beatrice bit her lip, and he could see the moment she made her decision. "All right, but only if you let me feed you properly, and I insist on paying you back every cent as soon as I'm able." "Deal." They shook hands on it, and Isaac felt that same jolt of connection he had felt earlier. This time, neither of them pulled away quickly. They stood there in the dim lamplight, hands clasped, and something unspoken passed between them. It was too soon to call it love, too fragile to name out loud, but it was real, and it was growing, and Isaac knew with sudden certainty that his life had just changed in ways he couldn't yet fully understand. The lean-to was exactly as ramshackle as the cabin itself, but Isaac had slept in worse places, and he set about making it habitable with the practiced efficiency of a man used to making do. He spread his bedroll on the dirt floor, arranged his saddlebags as a pillow, and lay down under the vast expanse of desert stars. Through the thin walls, he could hear the soft sounds of Beatrice tending to her mother, and he fell asleep to the comforting knowledge that, for the first time in years, he would wake up tomorrow in the same place he had gone to sleep. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Isaac rose early each morning to tend to his horse and check the property, then joined Beatrice for a simple breakfast before tackling whatever repair work was most urgent. The roof took 3 days to patch properly, with Isaac carefully replacing rotted timbers and re-chinkling the gaps where wind and rain had worked their way through. Beatrice worked alongside him when she could spare time from caring for her mother, handing him tools and holding boards steady while he hammered, and Isaac found himself looking forward to these moments of companionship more than he cared to admit. The garden needed work too, so Isaac dug a deeper irrigation channel to catch and hold what little rainwater fell in this arid landscape. He reinforced the chicken coop and built a small shed to store firewood for the coming winter. The work was hard and physical, but it was also satisfying in a way that cattle driving had never been. He was building something here, creating something of value that would last beyond his presence, and every evening when he saw the gratitude in Beatrice's eyes, he felt a sense of purpose he had been missing for years. Sarah's condition remained stable with the help of the laudanum, though it was clear to everyone that she was slowly fading. She spent most of her days sleeping, but in her lucid moments she was sharp and funny, telling stories of her teaching days that made both Isaac and Beatrice laugh. Isaac took to sitting with her in the evenings while Beatrice prepared supper, reading to her from the single book the family owned, a battered copy of Shakespeare's sonnets that had been Sarah's most prized possession. "You read well," Sarah told him one evening, her voice so weak he had to lean close to hear her. "Did you have much schooling?" "Only a few years," Isaac admitted. "My mother taught me when she could, but after she died, my father didn't see much point in it. Everything I know I learned from her." "She would be proud of the man you've become." "I'm not so sure about that. I've done things I'm not proud of, made choices that haunt me." Sarah reached out and patted his hand with her frail fingers. "We all have regrets, Isaac. The measure of a person isn't in their mistakes, but in what they do to make amends. And I think you're doing that now, whether you realize it or not." Isaac thought about her words long into the night, lying in his bedroll and staring up at the stars. He had spent so many years running from his past, from the pain of losing his mother and the anger he felt toward his father, that he had forgotten it was possible to stop running, to stand still and face the demons that chased him, to build something instead of always tearing away. It was Beatrice who finally forced him to confront what was growing between them. They had been working in the garden together one afternoon, Isaac digging and Beatrice planting, when she suddenly sat back on her heels and looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Why are you really still here?" she asked. "And don't tell me it's because of the roof or the garden. Those have been finished for days." Isaac stopped digging and met her gaze. He could have lied, could have given her some easy excuse, but he had never been good at lying, and he didn't want to start now. Not with her. "Because I don't want to leave," he said simply. "Because every morning I wake up thinking today will be the day I ride out, and every evening I find another reason to stay just one more day. Because when I'm with you, I don't feel lonely anymore." Beatrice's eyes widened, and a flush crept up her neck into her cheeks. "Isaac, I know it's too soon," he said quickly. "I know we barely know each other, but I can't help how I feel, Bea. When I look at you, I see someone I could build a life with, someone strong and brave and good, someone who makes me want to be a better man." "I feel it too," she whispered. "I've been trying not to, trying to tell myself it's just gratitude or loneliness or desperation. But it's more than that. When you're near me, I feel safe. When you smile at me, I feel like maybe everything will be all right. And that terrifies me, because I've never felt this way about anyone before." Isaac set down his shovel and moved to kneel beside her in the dirt. He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, and cupped her face in his hands. Her skin was soft despite the harshness of her life, and when she leaned into his touch, something in his chest loosened and expanded. "I don't want to rush you," he said, "and I know you're dealing with so much right now with your mother, but I need you to know that I'm not going anywhere. Not unless you tell me to go." "Don't go," Beatrice said, and then she closed the distance between them and kissed him. It was a tentative kiss at first, soft and exploring, but it quickly deepened into something more urgent. Isaac pulled her closer, mindful of her shorn head, and she wrapped her arms around his neck like she was afraid he might disappear if she let go. They kissed until they were both breathless, and when they finally pulled apart, Isaac rested his forehead against hers and tried to slow his racing heart. "I'm falling in love with you," he said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "I know it's crazy and too fast and probably the most foolish thing I've ever done, but I can't help it. I'm falling in love with you, Beatrice Hollis." Tears sparkled in her gray eyes, but she was smiling. "I'm falling in love with you too, Isaac Ingram, and you're right. It is crazy and too fast and probably foolish, but I don't care. I'm tired of being sensible. I'm tired of sacrificing everything and never getting anything good in return. You're the best thing that's happened to me in years, and I'm not going to let you slip away." They kissed again, and this time it was slower, sweeter, full of promise and possibility. When they finally returned to their work in the garden, everything had changed. They moved differently around each other now, finding excuses to touch, to brush against each other, to share secret smiles when they thought no one was looking. Sarah noticed, of course. It was impossible to hide the shift in their relationship, from someone as perceptive as she was, even in her weakened state. One evening, when Beatrice had gone to fetch water from the creek, Sarah called Isaac to her bedside and fixed him with a serious look. "You love my daughter," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, madam, I do." "And she loves you." "I believe so." Sarah nodded slowly. "Good, that's good. But I need you to promise me something, Isaac. When I'm gone, and I will be gone soon, I need you to promise me that you'll take care of her. That you won't let her waste away out here, trying to hang on to this place out of some misguided sense of loyalty to my memory. She deserves more than this. She deserves a real life, with a real home and a future. Can you promise me that?" Isaac felt his throat tighten. "I promise. I'll take care of her for the rest of my life, if she'll let me." "She'll let you. She's stubborn, but she's not stupid. She knows a good man when she sees one." Sarah reached out and gripped his hand with surprising strength. "I can die easy now, knowing she won't be alone. Thank you for that gift, Isaac. Thank you for loving my daughter. Thank you for raising someone I could love." Sarah smiled, and for just a moment, Isaac could see the vibrant woman she must have been before illness had stolen her vitality. Then the moment passed and she was just a dying woman in a narrow bed, but the peace on her face was unmistakable. 3 days later, Sarah Hollis passed away in her sleep. Beatrice found her in the morning, still and pale and finally free from pain, and the sound of her grief was something Isaac knew he would carry with him for the rest of his life. He held her while she sobbed, her body shaking with the force of her loss, and he whispered meaningless words of comfort that did nothing to ease her pain but at least let her know she wasn't alone. They buried Sarah on a hillside overlooking the cabin, with a simple wooden cross that Isaac carved himself to mark the spot. Beatrice insisted on reading from the Shakespeare sonnets during the service, her voice breaking on the words but pushing through with determined grace. Isaac stood beside her with his hand on the small of her back, offering what support he could, and when it was over, they walked back to the cabin in silence. The days that followed were difficult. Beatrice moved through them like a ghost, going through the motions of living, but with a hollowness in her eyes that made Isaac's heart ache. He stayed close, always within reach but never pushing, letting her grieve in her own way and her own time. He kept the cabin running, tending the garden and the chickens, making simple meals that Beatrice barely touched, and waiting for her to come back to herself. It took almost 2 weeks before she finally broke. Isaac found her standing at her mother's grave, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs, and he went to her without hesitation. She turned into his arms and cried until she had no tears left, and when she finally pulled back, her eyes were red, but clearer than they had been since Sarah's death. "I don't know what to do now," she said. "My whole life has been about taking care of her, and now she's gone and I feel so lost." "You live," Isaac said gently. "You honor her memory by building the life she wanted for you, the life she made me promise I would help you build." Beatrice looked up at him sharply. "She talked to you about that?" "A few days before she died, she made me promise to take care of you, to make sure you didn't waste your life out here trying to hold on to the past." "And what did you tell her?" "I told her I would take care of you for the rest of my life, if you would let me." Beatrice's breath caught, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. But these were different tears, softer somehow, less about grief and more about hope. "Are you asking me what I think you're asking me?" Isaac reached into his pocket and pulled out a small ring. It was nothing fancy, just a simple band of silver that he had traded for in town, but it was all he had to offer her. He dropped to one knee right there in the dirt beside her mother's grave, and he took her work-roughened hand in his. "Beatrice Hollis, I know we haven't known each other long. I know this isn't the most romantic proposal, and I know I don't have much to offer you beyond a good horse and a strong back. But I love you with everything I am, and I promise that if you'll have me, I will spend every day of the rest of my life trying to make you happy. Will you marry me?" Beatrice dropped to her knees in front of him, careless of the dirt staining her dress, and cupped his face in her hands. "Yes," she said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, Isaac Ingram, I will marry you. And you're wrong about not having much to offer. You've given me everything that matters. You've given me hope and love and a future. You've given me yourself." Isaac slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the pent-up emotion of the past 2 weeks. When they finally broke apart, they were both smiling, and for the first time since Sarah's death, the weight on Isaac's chest felt a little lighter. They were married a week later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Moab. Beatrice wore her best dress, a faded blue calico that she had carefully mended and pressed, and Isaac borrowed a jacket from the livery stable owner who had become something of a friend during his time in town. The ceremony was witnessed by a handful of townspeople who had come to know and respect Beatrice during her years in Moab, and the preacher's wife baked them a small cake as a wedding gift. After the ceremony, they returned to the cabin as husband and wife, and Isaac carried Beatrice over the threshold with a flourish that made her laugh. The sound of her laughter was like music after the weeks of grief, and Isaac found himself grinning like a fool as he set her down gently in the middle of their small home. "We should probably talk about what comes next," Beatrice said as they sat together at the table, sharing the wedding cake. "I know you wanted to find work on a ranch, and I don't want to hold you back from that." "You're not holding me back," Isaac said firmly. "You're the reason I have something to work toward now. But we do need to think practically. This cabin won't support us through the winter, and I need to find steady work." "I've been thinking about that," Beatrice said slowly. "There's a ranch about 15 miles south of here, the Running Creek Ranch. The owner, Mr. Peterson, came into town a few months ago looking for hands. He said he needed men who could work with horses and weren't afraid of hard labor. Maybe you could talk to him." "That's a good idea. I could ride down there tomorrow, see if he's still hiring." "We could both go," Beatrice suggested. "I don't want to be apart from you so soon after the wedding." Isaac reached across the table and took her hand, running his thumb over the silver ring on her finger. "I like the sound of that. We'll go together." That night, they lay together in the narrow bed that had been Beatrice's, learning each other's bodies with gentle reverence. Isaac was careful with her, mindful that she was a virgin, and that this experience should be as perfect as he could make it. Beatrice was shy at first, but her natural curiosity and the growing passion between them soon overcame her hesitation. They moved together in the darkness, finding a rhythm that was uniquely theirs, and when they finally lay spent and tangled together, Isaac felt a completeness he had never experienced before. "I love you," Beatrice whispered against his chest. "I love you so much it scares me." "Don't be scared," Isaac said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head, feeling the unfamiliar stubble of her growing hair against his lips. "We're in this together now. Whatever comes, we'll face it side by side." The next morning, they packed what few possessions they had and locked up the cabin. Isaac helped Beatrice onto his horse, and together they rode south toward the Running Creek Ranch and whatever future awaited them there. The red rock canyons of Utah stretched out around them in all directions, vast and beautiful and unforgiving. But Isaac felt no fear. He had found his home, and it wasn't a place. It was the woman riding in front of him, her body warm and solid against his chest, her hair slowly growing back in soft stubble that he loved to run his hands over when she would let him. The Running Creek Ranch turned out to be a sprawling operation with hundreds of head of cattle and horses spread across thousands of acres of high desert grassland. The ranch house itself was an impressive 2-story structure built of adobe and timber, and the bunkhouse where the hands stayed was well maintained and clean. Mr. Peterson, the owner, was a weathered man in his 50s with sharp eyes and a firm handshake. He looked Isaac over carefully, asking pointed questions about his experience with horses and cattle, and then surprised them both by addressing Beatrice directly. "Can you cook?" he asked bluntly. "My wife passed 2 years back, and the hands have been making do with their own cooking, which is fit to poison a man. If you can cook decent food, I'd be willing to hire both of you. Your husband can work as a ranch hand, and you can manage the cookhouse and do the laundry. I'll pay fair wages and provide housing in one of the small cottages near the main house." Beatrice and Isaac exchanged glances, and Isaac could see the hope and relief in her eyes. "I can cook," she said firmly. "My mother taught me well, and I've been managing a household on my own for years. If you give me a chance, I promise you won't be disappointed." "Fair enough. You can start tomorrow. Let me show you to your cottage." The cottage was small but sturdy, with 2 rooms and a real stove and glass windows that let in the light. It was a palace compared to the cabin they had left behind, and Beatrice actually gasped when she saw it. There was a proper bed frame, a table with 4 chairs, a wardrobe for their clothes, and even a small washstand with a porcelain basin. Isaac could see her eyes filling with tears as she took it all in, and he understood completely. This wasn't just a house. This was the possibility of a real life, the kind of stability and comfort that had been nothing but a distant dream for so long. "It's perfect," she whispered, turning to Isaac with shining eyes. "It's absolutely perfect." Isaac pulled her into his arms and held her close, breathing in the scent of her skin and feeling grateful beyond words that he had stopped in Moab that day, that he had noticed her tears, that he had been brave enough to offer help to a stranger. Because that stranger had become his wife, his love, his entire world, and he knew with absolute certainty that he would do everything in his power to give her the life she deserved. They settled into their new roles at the Running Creek Ranch with surprising ease. Isaac's experience with horses and cattle made him a valuable addition to the crew, and he quickly earned the respect of the other ranch hands with his hard work and easy manner. Beatrice threw herself into her work in the cookhouse with enthusiasm, preparing 3 meals a day for the dozen or so men who worked the ranch. Her cooking was simple but hearty, and within days the men were singing her praises and looking forward to mealtimes in a way they hadn't in years. The rhythm of ranch life suited them both. They rose early each morning, Isaac heading out to work the cattle while Beatrice started breakfast. They met up for meals throughout the day, stealing moments together whenever they could, and in the evenings they retreated to their cottage where they could be alone together. Slowly but surely, they built a life that was entirely their own, separate from the grief and hardship that had brought them together. As autumn deepened into winter and the weather turned cold, Beatrice's hair began to grow back in earnest. It came in thick and dark, and Isaac loved to watch her brush it out each night, the strands getting a little longer with each passing week. She was self-conscious about it at first, remembering the shocked stares and whispered comments from the people in Moab, but Isaac made sure to tell her every single day how beautiful she was, regardless of the length of her hair. "I fell in love with you when you were bald as an egg," he told her one night as they lay together in their warm bed while snow fell softly outside. "The hair is just a bonus." Beatrice laughed and swatted his chest playfully. "You're terrible." "I'm honest. There's a difference." She grew serious then, her fingers tracing patterns on his bare skin. "Do you ever regret it? Stopping in Moab that day? Taking on someone else's troubles when you could have just kept riding?" "Never," Isaac said without hesitation. "Meeting you was the best thing that ever happened to me. You gave me a reason to stop running, Bea. You gave me a home." "You gave me the same thing," she said softly. "I was so lost before you came along, so tired of fighting and sacrificing and never seeing any way forward. And then there you were, this stranger who helped me for no reason other than it was the right thing to do. You saved me, Isaac. In every way a person can be saved." Isaac kissed her then, long and slow and deep, and they made love with the tender familiarity of 2 people who knew each other's bodies and hearts completely. Afterward, as Beatrice dozed against his chest, Isaac stared up at the ceiling and thought about how much his life had changed in just a few short months. He had gone from a rootless drifter with no connections and no purpose to a married man with a home and a job and a future that stretched out bright and promising before him. And it was all because he had been brave enough to stop and help a crying woman outside a general store in Moab, Utah. Winter passed into spring, and with the warming weather came new life. The cattle dropped their calves, the garden behind the cottage burst into bloom, and Beatrice began to suspect that she was carrying new life of her own. She waited until she was certain before telling Isaac, choosing a quiet evening when they were sitting together on the small porch of their cottage, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and crimson. "I have something to tell you," she said, taking his hand and pressing it against her still flat belly. "We're going to have a baby." Isaac's eyes went wide, and for a moment he couldn't speak. Then a grin split his face, and he let out a whoop of joy that startled the horses in the nearby corral. He picked Beatrice up and spun her around, being careful not to jostle her too much, and when he set her down, there were tears of happiness streaming down his face. "We're having a baby," he repeated, wonder and disbelief and pure joy mingling in his voice. "We're going to be parents." "Are you happy?" Beatrice asked, though she could see the answer written plainly on his face. Happy doesn't even begin to cover it, Isaac said, pulling her close and resting his hand over hers on her belly. I'm terrified and thrilled and grateful beyond words. Thank you for this gift, Bea. Thank you for giving me a family. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Beatrice continued to work in the cookhouse through most of it, only stopping in the final weeks when her belly had grown so large that standing for long periods became uncomfortable. The ranch hands treated her with protective courtesy, and Mr. Peterson's daughter Mary, who lived on a neighboring property, came to visit regularly and offered advice and support. Isaac hovered over Beatrice constantly, worried about every twinge and discomfort, until she finally had to shoo him away and tell him she was pregnant, not dying. Their son was born on a clear October morning in 1879, exactly 1 year after Isaac had first ridden into Moab. The labor was long and difficult, but Beatrice was strong and determined, and when the baby finally emerged red-faced and squalling, Isaac felt his heart expand to a size he hadn't known was possible. They named him Samuel Isaac Ingram, after Isaac's younger brother who had died of fever all those years ago, and from the moment he drew his first breath, Samuel owned his parents completely. Fatherhood suited Isaac in ways he had never expected. He took to it with the same quiet competence he brought to everything else, learning to change diapers and soothe midnight crying fits and marvel at every tiny milestone. Watching Beatrice with their son filled him with a love so profound, it sometimes brought him to tears. She was a natural mother, patient and nurturing and fiercely protective, and Isaac often found himself just standing in the doorway of their cottage, watching her nurse Samuel or sing him lullabies, and feeling grateful for the twist of fate that had brought them together. As Samuel grew from an infant into a toddler, Isaac and Beatrice's life at the Running Creek Ranch became even more settled. Isaac had proven himself to be one of Mr. Peterson's most reliable hands, and his wages had increased accordingly. They were able to save money for the first time in either of their lives, and they began to talk seriously about the possibility of buying their own small piece of land someday, perhaps even starting their own ranch. But those plans were still distant dreams. For now they were content with the life they had built together. Their cottage felt like a real home, filled with the sounds of Samuel's laughter and the smell of Beatrice's cooking, and the quiet contentment that came from being exactly where they were meant to be. On Sunday afternoons, they would take Samuel and walk up into the hills, and sometimes they would ride out to the old cabin where they had first fallen in love. The cabin was beginning to fall into disrepair now, but the grave on the hillside was well tended, thanks to Isaac's faithful visits. He would stand there with Beatrice and Samuel, and he would tell Sarah about her grandson, about all the things that had happened since she had died, and he liked to think that somewhere, somehow, she was listening and smiling. 3 years passed in this peaceful way, and then Mr. Peterson called Isaac into his office one spring morning with a proposition that would change their lives yet again. The old rancher was getting on in years and had been thinking about his legacy, about what would happen to the Running Creek Ranch when he was gone. His own children had scattered to various parts of the country and had no interest in ranching, and he had no desire to see the land he had spent his life building broken up and sold off to strangers. "I've been watching you, Isaac," Mr. Peterson said, his weathered face serious. "Watching the way you work, the way you treat the land and the animals and the other men. You're the kind of man I would have been proud to call a son. So I have a proposition for you. I want to sell you a section of land on the eastern edge of the property, 500 acres that border the creek. It's good land, with water and grass and enough room to run your own herd. I'll give you a fair price and flexible terms on the payment. What do you say?" Isaac was stunned. 500 acres was more land than he had ever dreamed of owning, and the opportunity to build his own operation from the ground up was everything he had been working toward. But it was also a huge commitment, a massive financial risk that would affect not just him, but Beatrice and Samuel as well. "Can I discuss it with my wife?" Isaac asked. "This is a decision we need to make together." "Of course. Take your time. The offer stands." That evening, Isaac laid out the proposition to Beatrice, explaining both the incredible opportunity and the very real risks. To his surprise, she didn't hesitate. "We should do it," she said firmly. "This is our chance to build something that will last, something we can pass on to Samuel and any other children we might have. Yes, it's a risk, but you're the hardest working man I know, and I believe in you. I believe in us." Isaac pulled her into his arms and held her tight, overwhelmed by her faith in him and in their future together. "Are you sure? It means years of hard work and sacrifice. It means living lean while we get the operation established." "I'm used to living lean," Beatrice reminded him with a small smile, "and I'm used to hard work and sacrifice. But this time, it's for us, for our family, for our future. That makes all the difference." They shook hands with Mr. Peterson the next day, and within a month they had moved into a tent on their new property, while Isaac began the backbreaking work of building a house and barn and corrals. It was the hardest physical labor he had ever done, made bearable only by Beatrice's unwavering support and the knowledge that every board he nailed and every post he sank was bringing them closer to their dream. The house took shape slowly over the course of that summer, rising from the prairie grass like something born of the land itself. It was a simple structure, just 4 rooms and a porch, but it was solid and well built and entirely theirs. When Isaac finally carried Beatrice over the threshold for the second time in their marriage, with Samuel toddling along behind them, he felt a pride and satisfaction deeper than anything he had ever experienced. They named their new ranch the Rising Sun, after the way the morning light looked when it first touched the red rock cliffs to the east. It started small, with just 20 head of cattle that Isaac bought with their savings and a loan from Mr. Peterson. But Isaac had learned well during his years on the trail and at the Running Creek Ranch. He knew how to manage cattle, how to find water in this harsh landscape, how to make do with limited resources. Slowly but surely, the herd grew. Beatrice worked just as hard as Isaac, managing their household and their finances with the same fierce determination she had shown when caring for her dying mother. She kept a garden that provided them with vegetables through the summer and fall, and she learned to preserve food for the winter months. She made their clothes and mended them when they wore out, and she taught Samuel his letters using the Shakespeare sonnets that had belonged to her mother, the same book she had read at Sarah's funeral. 2 years after they started the Rising Sun, Beatrice gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Sarah Grace Ingram in honor of Beatrice's mother. She had the same gray eyes as her mother and grandmother, and from the moment she could walk, she followed her father around like a devoted shadow. Samuel, now 6 years old and already showing signs of becoming as tall as his father, took his role as big brother seriously, watching over Sarah with protective devotion. Life on the Rising Sun was hard but deeply satisfying. They worked from sunup to sundown, and there were times when money was so tight that they had to make difficult choices about where to spend it. But there were good times too, moments of pure joy that made all the struggle worthwhile. Sunday picnics by the creek with the children splashing in the water, evening dances in their small living room with Isaac playing the harmonica he had learned as a boy, and Beatrice twirling the children until they collapsed in giggling heaps. Quiet nights after the children were asleep, when Isaac and Beatrice would sit on their porch and watch the stars and marvel at how far they had come. 5 years after starting the Rising Sun, their herd had grown to 200 head, and they had built a reputation for raising quality cattle. Mr. Peterson had passed away the previous winter, and much of the Running Creek Ranch had been sold off to various buyers. But Isaac and Beatrice's operation continued to thrive. They had paid off their loan and were finally starting to see the fruits of their years of hard labor. It was around this time that Beatrice surprised Isaac by announcing she was pregnant again. They had thought their family was complete with Samuel and Sarah, but this unexpected blessing was welcomed with open arms. Their third child, a son they named Thomas Isaac Ingram, was born in the spring of 1886, and he completed their family in ways they hadn't known they needed. The years continued to pass in a rhythm that became as familiar and comfortable as breathing. Samuel grew into a capable young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did, and he began taking on more and more responsibility for managing the herd. Sarah proved to have her mother's sharp mind and practical nature, keeping the household accounts and helping with the endless work that came with ranch life. Thomas was the wild card, full of mischief and energy, keeping everyone on their toes with his antics. Through it all, Isaac and Beatrice's love for each other only deepened. They had weathered hardship and loss, had built something meaningful from nothing, and had raised 3 children together. The passion of their early days had evolved into something richer and more profound, a partnership built on mutual respect and unwavering support. They still stole moments alone whenever they could, still made love with the same tender urgency they had on their wedding night, and Isaac still told Beatrice every single day how beautiful she was. Her hair had long since grown back, falling in thick waves past her shoulders now, though there were threads of silver starting to appear at the temples. Isaac loved to run his fingers through it, remembering the day he had first seen her with it shorn to the scalp, remembering how her whispered confession had broken his heart and changed his life forever. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, he would tell the children the story of how he and their mother had met, of the sacrifice she had made for her own mother, of how love could bloom even in the harshest circumstances. "Your mother is the bravest person I've ever known," he would tell them. "She taught me that real strength isn't about never being afraid or never needing help. It's about doing what needs to be done, even when it's hard, even when it costs you something precious. And she taught me that the best things in life are worth fighting for, worth sacrificing for, worth everything." On their 20th wedding anniversary, Isaac surprised Beatrice with a gift he had been planning for months. He led her out to the hillside above their ranch house, where he had built a stone monument inscribed with the words, "In loving memory of Sarah Hollis, beloved mother and grandmother, who taught us the meaning of sacrifice and love." Next to it, he had planted a grove of cottonwood trees that would grow tall and provide shade for generations to come. Beatrice wept when she saw it, happy tears that spoke of grief finally healed and love that had endured. She turned to Isaac and took his face in her hands, looking at him with eyes that held 20 years of shared history. "You gave me everything," she said. "When I had nothing, when I had given up everything I could give, you showed up and gave me hope. You gave me love. You gave me a family and a home and a future. How did I get so lucky?" "I'm the lucky one," Isaac said, pulling her close. "I was just a drifter, with no purpose and no direction until I met you. You gave me a reason to stop running. You showed me what it means to really live, not just exist. Everything good in my life started the day I saw you crying outside that general store in Moab." They stood there together on the hillside, watching the sun set over the land they had built together, and Isaac thought about how one moment of compassion had changed both of their lives forever. He had stopped to help a stranger, and that stranger had become his everything. Their love story had started with sacrifice and sorrow, but it had grown into something beautiful and lasting, something that would endure long after they were both gone. Samuel took over more and more of the ranch operations as he grew into his 20s, proving himself to be every bit as capable as his father. Sarah married a neighboring rancher's son, a good man named David, who loved her fiercely and treated her with respect. They built their own house on a corner of the Rising Sun property, and Sarah gave Isaac and Beatrice their first grandchildren, twin girls with their grandmother's gray eyes. Thomas, still restless and adventurous, spent several years working on ranches throughout the West, before finally settling down and deciding that the Rising Sun was where he belonged. As Isaac and Beatrice grew older, they began to step back from the daily operations of the ranch, trusting their children to carry on the legacy they had built. They spent their days working in the garden, playing with their grandchildren, and simply enjoying each other's company in the way that only people who have spent a lifetime together can. They would sit on their porch in the evenings, Isaac's arm around Beatrice's shoulders, and watch the sun paint the sky in brilliant colors, and they would remember. They remembered the desperate girl with shorn hair and the drifter who stopped to help her. They remembered the sacrifice that had brought them together and the love that had sustained them through decades of hard work and struggle. They remembered every moment, good and bad, that had led them to this place of contentment and peace. On a warm October evening in 1908, 30 years to the day since Isaac had first ridden into Moab, they stood together at the stone monument he had built for Sarah Hollis all those years ago. The cottonwood trees had grown tall and strong, their leaves rustling in the evening breeze, and in the distance they could hear their grandchildren laughing as they played near the creek. "Do you think she knows?" Beatrice asked, her hand in Isaac's as she looked at her mother's monument. "Do you think she knows how it all turned out?" "I think she knows," Isaac said. "I think she saw it coming before either of us did. She knew we belonged together, and she made me promise to take care of you. Best promise I ever made." Beatrice leaned into him, and they stood there in comfortable silence as the sun set on another day in their long and beautiful life together. The Rising Sun Ranch spread out below them, prosperous and thriving, home to their children and grandchildren and all the generations that would come after. It was more than either of them had ever dreamed possible on that desperate day in Moab, when a woman with shorn hair had whispered her confession to a stranger and changed both of their lives forever. They had built something that would last, something meaningful and good. They had loved each other through joy and sorrow, through hardship and triumph, and that love had created something bigger than either of them alone could have imagined. As darkness fell and the stars began to appear in the vast Utah sky, Isaac pulled Beatrice close and kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, that hair that had once been sacrificed for love and had grown back even more beautiful than before. "I love you," he whispered, the same words he had spoken countless times over the past 30 years, words that had never lost their meaning or their power. "I love you too," Beatrice replied, as she always did, and would continue to do for all the years they had left together. And in that moment, with the stars blazing overhead and their family safe and happy around them, Isaac Ingram knew that he had found what he had been searching for all those lonely years on the trail. He had found his home, his purpose, his reason for being. He had found it in a woman who had been brave enough to sacrifice everything for love and generous enough to give him the chance to prove that he was worthy of her trust. Their love story had started with a simple act of kindness on a dusty street in Moab, Utah, and it had grown into something extraordinary. It was a testament to the power of compassion, to the strength that comes from choosing to help rather than walk away, and to the transformative nature of love itself. Isaac and Beatrice had taken their pain and their losses and their struggles, and they had alchemized them into something beautiful and lasting. As they walked hand in hand back down the hillside toward their home, toward the warmth and light and love that waited for them there, Isaac knew with absolute certainty that he would do it all over again in a heartbeat. Every hardship, every sacrifice, every moment of uncertainty had been worth it to end up here, with this woman by his side, and this life spread out before them. The Rising Sun Ranch would endure long after they were gone, a legacy of love and hard work that would pass from generation to generation. Their children would tell their grandchildren the story of how it all began, of the stranger who stopped to help and the woman who had sold her hair for her mother's medicine. And those grandchildren would tell their own children, and the story would become part of the fabric of the family, a reminder that the greatest things in life often start with the smallest acts of kindness. But that was still to come. For now, Isaac and Beatrice had years ahead of them, years to watch their grandchildren grow, years to work in the garden and sit on the porch and simply be together, years to prove every single day that love was worth fighting for, worth sacrificing for, worth everything. And as they stepped through the door of their home, into the warm light and the sound of their family's voices, Isaac squeezed Beatrice's hand and smiled. This was what happiness looked like. This was what a life well lived felt like. And it had all started with a moment of compassion on a dusty street in Moab, Utah, 30 years ago. The end of their story was still years away, but when it finally came, they would face it together as they had faced everything else. And when they were finally laid to rest side by side on the hillside next to Sarah Hollis, under the shade of the cottonwood trees Isaac had planted, their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren would gather to remember them. They would remember Isaac and Beatrice Ingram, who had built the Rising Sun Ranch from nothing, who had loved each other with a fierce and enduring passion, and who had proved that even in the harsh landscape of the American West, love could not only survive but thrive. Their legacy would be measured not just in acres and cattle and buildings, but in the values they had passed down through generations: hard work, compassion, the importance of family, the willingness to sacrifice for those you love, and above all, the understanding that love was the most valuable thing any person could possess, worth more than gold or land or any material wealth. The story of how Isaac and Beatrice fell in love would become legendary in their family, told and retold until it took on the quality of myth. But for those who had lived it, who had been there in those early days when everything was uncertain and terrifying and new. It was simply their life. It was the reality they had created together through choice and chance and determination. And what a beautiful reality it was.